So I'd now like to introduce Betty, and it's fair to say that this is Betty's idea that we would have this interview. So that's why she gets to take over from here. So Betty has been part of the NewMR story herself since the very beginning, being part of the very first festival, which was just over 10 years ago. So welcome, Betty, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue. And as Sue rightly said, this is an interview with Ray and Sue today. They're going to be in the limelight because today we're interviewing Ray and Sue to find out more about the NewMR story, how NewMR got started, what the expectations were, and so on. And it is fair to say that this was my bright idea, and Sue and Ray probably feeling very uncomfortable and cringy at being asked to kind of tell all about their story. And this started from December last year when Ray and Sue asked some participants, some speakers from 10 years ago to come back and say, what have we been up to in the last decade? And I thought to myself, well, hold on a minute. We're hearing from the speakers of 10 years ago, but what about the founders themselves? Let's put them in the hot seat and find out about what's gone on in the last decade for them and NewMR. And this can form part of that celebration. The other reason that it's really important to celebrate the 10-year anniversary with Ray and Sue today is because of their tremendous contributions to the market research industry. And I don't use the word tremendous lightly there. Both Ray and Sue do so much for our research industry, public speaking, mentoring, NewMR in itself. And it's no easy feat to run something like NewMR and do what they do and still do it with so much passion and enthusiasm. So now I think Ray and Sue have probably cringed enough at my compliments. I will move on to the interview portion. So let's start at the beginning. So Ray and Sue, how did NewMR start?
Well, I think, Betty, it's fair to say that the sort of origin story of NewMR is really the Festival of NewMR. So somewhere towards December 2010, an idea emerged, and I'm not sure we really know entirely what the impetus was, how it started, but there was an idea that we would have this thing called the Festival of NewMR, and there were lots of people involved in various ways. But I think the heart of the idea of the Festival of NewMR would be that the broader audience would curate what the program was. So we put out a call for speakers, people submitted their idea for a presentation, we then put them up on a website, there was a mechanism by which people could vote for which papers they wanted to see, and the people who got the most votes presented on the program. So it was very much a, by the people, for the people idea. And it was really the idea of running that festival that started NewMR. And I think, we enjoyed it. Other people seemed to enjoy it. Lots of people attended, so that we kept going. I think if we think back, although 10 years ago is in many ways not that long ago, there weren't a lot of webinar events around. There weren't many. And the idea was that we would run a 24-hour webinar starting when people started to get up and get to work in New Zealand, and follow the sun around the globe, so to speak. And it was a whole lot of fun. I think it's fair to say that we probably haven't run as intensive events since, because it was actually just so much content, people awake online for hours and hours. And I think we learnt a lot. We enjoyed it. And the webinar idea was relatively new and fresh. And, for those of us who live in, different parts of the world, not everybody lives in a London or a New York where there's lots of events that they can get to, every day of the week. It really did appeal to me particularly, I think, to give people who, live in geographically different areas, access to some of, the best speakers and best content in the world.
Mm. Well, thank you, Sue. And yeah, you're quite right that there are lots of places around the world where people don't have ease of access to some of the brilliant market research events. So the fact that NewMR was online and accessible to all was a a great idea back then. Now, for context, for those who don't know, Sue is actually based in Australia. So when she talks about potentially not being able to get to some of those city-based events easily, that's because she lives on a massive continent. So we're celebrating NewMR's 10-year anniversary, which is absolutely fantastic. What an achievement. Now, why do you think that NewMR has been able to survive all these years, particularly in an age where podcasts come and go and that sort of thing? What's the secret to NewMR's survival?
I think there are a few bits and pieces, Betty. So there are, first of all, you've got to have an audience. So there are people who want to expand their knowledge. They're a smaller percentage of our industry than you might think or wish, but there are plenty of them. People who want to come along, listen to events, find out more about things, test their own knowledge and so on. So that's the first element, that there are people. And building on what Sue says, most people can't attend conferences. And even if you take a really big event like an SMR Congress or the MRS Impact show, the vast majority of people can't get there. And most presentations are only given once, which seems like a terrible waste. So we are very happy for people to present things which they have presented at other conferences, because there are going to be thousands of people who haven't seen it who want to see it. And the second ingredient of why NewMR has been able to be successful is that there are lots of people who are willing to share their knowledge, people like yourself who put out time, will create presentations and then share them. So we have people who want to see things around the world, and we have people who are happy to share things. And by enabling that and changing as the times change, we've been able to stay relevant for those 10 years, and let's see what's coming next.
Great, thank you, Ray. And I don't know if I can call myself NewMR's biggest fan, but I'm going to anyway. It is really fantastic that, you know, I mean, there are lots of people, no matter what kind of budget they're on, it can be quite pricey. Let's face it, to get on a plane and go to a conference and stay in a hotel and things like that. And of course, that expenditure, we know that the conferences need that. There's so much expenditure when it comes to running a big event like SMR Congress or the MRS Impact Conference and things like that. So having something free or where people could donate back then, 10 years ago, was really a game changer. So it's great that it's survived all these years. Now, for the next question, what does NewMR provide the community or communities of market research and insight and data analysis and so on that perhaps we might not have from other organisations?
I think we've probably touched on that a little bit already, talking about, like providing access to people who perhaps, can't travel for various reasons, or for whom, it's just not possible. But I think one of the important points that you probably touch on sort of goes to our philosophy. We have never wanted to do things that other people were already doing or were doing well. So we probably look around for something that needs doing and then do it, as opposed to thinking, that's already a great idea, let's try and do another version of that. So I think we're probably always, thinking, where is this gap that we can fill? If somebody else is doing it, that's great. There's always a whole bunch of stuff that needs doing. So let's not duplicate anything and try and sort of make a difference where we can. So I suspect some of these things, will continue to change. We certainly, have done some things in the past that we, have moved on from, and, I imagine it's part of our DNA to keep changing in many ways. So, we'll be, sort of scanning around for, where the gaps are and what's being done elsewhere, and kind of approaching it like that.
Thank you, Sue. And so, I mean, of course, the both of you have full-time jobs. And I think this is one of the challenge with anybody who wants to start up a webinar platform or a podcast, is it often contends with the thing that they do for the living, where they earn the money and pay the bills. And of course, Ray and Sue, you're probably two of the busiest people in market research that I know. And the other challenge, of course, is that one of you is based in the UK and Sue, you're based in Australia. So What's the key in making this overseas collaboration work, and especially with contending with all the other responsibilities that you individually have?
Well, there are clearly some challenges, and they are much more marked in 2020 because we would normally be, Sue might be in Europe, I might be in Australia, or we might be, for example, last year at the RANS conference, last year, 2019, at the New Zealand National Conference. So it's not always remote, but in 2020 it has been. There are some benefits in terms of covering clients and making sure that you don't become parochial. So we have quite a strong Asia Pacific focus, and Sue keeps us honest on that to make sure that we're looking for our audience there. And in terms of Europe and North America, we often refer to Atlantic time, which is 3 o'clock in the afternoon UK time, 10 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast of the US. So we try to get a global picture, and that is certainly helped by having 2 bases. We were obviously really early into remote working, which is now the norm for nearly everybody. Despite that, we still mute ourselves when we don't intend to occasionally. But all of that works. But there certainly are challenges. We wouldn't say that there haven't been.
Oh, but it also sounds like actually the 2 of you working in different parts of the globe has its opportunities as well. You're covering so many different time zones, and as you say, Ray, Sue keeps NewMR on the pulse when it comes to looking after the Asia Pacific region, which is great. We have an audience question here. Do you think in the last 10 years there's been something NewMR related to, for example, an event, a technology, a new business that has had the most impact on the insights industry? And an extra piece here, feel free to ignore modesty on your own parts.
I think so. And I think that, for example, we had a presentation from Brian Fine at the festival about gamification, followed up by a whole event. And you presented at that, Betty. That led to a book that gamification was happening. It would have happened without NewMR. Your book would probably have happened without NewMR. But I think we helped all of those things move forward. Jumping right up to date, in 2020, we probably spent about 8 hours of broadcast time working with Rachel Laws on semiotics. And I think that we have helped push fantastic book that Rachel has done, the great work that she's done, but we've given it another push, and I think that that will help move that through. And I think as well, the type of debate that we try to encourage, I can see quite a lot of other organizations engaging in similar things. Some of the broadcasts that Jam in Brazil does, I think, are very much in the same tone of let's be positive, let's be collaborative. So I like to think that we have helped create that climate.
Yeah. The other thing, or another thing I think that we have done is, and it was very much back to the first festival, this idea of, put yourself forward and people can vote for you. And the fact that you could present, without having travel budget and things like that. A lot of people who are, really strongly, well-known speakers on the conference scene. Now, again, they probably would still be well-known speakers on the conference scene. One of the first events they often spoke at was something like the Festival of NewMR. So it gave some people who perhaps might not have had the chance to present, a chance to put themselves forward and not have to, ask for a lot of budget or have a lot of money to travel somewhere. If you were prepared to put yourself forward, I think quite a few people, one of the first conferences they spoke at was the Festival of NewMR. So I think that's been I hope people think that's been a valuable contribution.
Yeah. Well, as one of those speakers, when my first online presentation was with NewMR, I can say it was really valuable. And also from a more kind of logistics point of view, because prior to speaking for the first time on NewMR, I had done stage conference presentations. but none of them were ever recorded. And it was great to have a chance to create a presentation, share it with potentially a wider audience, and certainly an audience maybe that didn't come to the conferences before. And it was part of my personal and professional archive, as well as something I could send to clients. And I know that fellow speakers who have been on NewMR have had very similar sentiments there as well. So yes, it's certainly been good to get the names out there and, you know, help build careers. So thank you both for that as well. So moving on, if NewMR ever did conduct a face-to-face event and budget was limitless, where would you like to have it in the world and why? And we'll start with you, Ray.
Yes, so actually I know that Sue and I have got quite different views on this. So my first choice would be Malta. And I say that because I attended a conference that Jasper Lim of Merlin organized in Malta quite a few years ago. And it pulls together some of the real benefits of a certain type of conference. You are miles from anywhere. Everybody who's gone there is committed. There's no office to go to. You're all at the hotel. We all stayed in the same hotel. We were attending the conference. The meetings were upstairs on a rooftop session. Luckily, it didn't rain. And then we went out evening. So I think that sense of getting to know each other is really interesting. And there's a place in the UK called Edale, which is in the mountains at the start of a long walk called the Pennine Way. And I've long had the idea of maybe have an event there, stopping in the bed and breakfasts, combining discussions about research with either climbing, hiking, walking, drawing, painting, depending on what people's preferences are, and just try to getting at a different side of what's going on. But Sue?
When we were talking about this, I actually bandied a few city names around earlier in the week. And then as I was reflecting on it again, I mean, I would go almost anywhere for the right conference. Because to me, it's not so much the city. It's, you know, the people that we bring together. I think some of the things Ray's touched on, you know, sometimes a city or a conference can be, you know, too big. So people end up, you know, spread across different hotels. I think, you know, everybody being in the conference hotel, you know, the serendipity of bumping into somebody, you know, as you're checking in, or, you know, at the bar when you've got there the day early or you've stayed the day later. And I think probably, you know, there are lots of lovely places, you know, that we can go to. It's always nice to have the opportunity to go somewhere you've never been before because the conference is there. So, you know, I'd be happy anywhere.
I think that's lovely. So Ray's point of view is let's get all the market researchers on an island so they've got nowhere else to go. But I can imagine that Malta would be quite fun. A market research takeover on Malta.
And then do we vote people
Betty,
off the island?
I know that you and I have... Sorry, Sue.
Do we vote people off the island or on the island?
Would be a funny reality TV.
And in terms of these sort of remote conferences, Sue and I have attended sawtooth conferences, which tend to work like that. Everybody who is there is all located in one place. Betty, for a moment there, it looked like your video was freezing, but you seem to be back. I know that you have been, like me, to a BIG conference. And again, that is one of those isolated conferences. We were all together there. There's nowhere else to go. And I think you do get to know the other delegates better, particularly if it's fewer than 150 people, ideally fewer than 100 people, then everybody is much more likely to get to know the other attendees.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for a more intimate conference. And whoever is listening and likes the idea of a market research reality TV show, write us in. Let us know more about it. Let's see if NewMR can do something with that. So between the two of you, obviously more than 10 years, because obviously you've both been in the MR industry for longer than when you started NewMR. A presentation to both of your ears would have to really stand out. I mean, in many ways, you've heard it all before. So Has there been a favourite sort of standout NewMR presentation that really kind of, you can remember really easily out of the sea of presentations over the last decade?
So lots and lots of highlights over the years, including you, of course, Betty. But let's start with John Kieran, who was one of the first to understand that webinars are like radio. And he has a wonderful fireside chat style of presenting, and sort of sucked you into the speakers, which was great. Jumping to very recently, we had What White Researchers Need to Hear in 2020, some fantastic speakers. Wale, we had with us, we had Shannon, lots and lots of people, and it was really the passion and the topic. But one of the most startling comments was from a very senior client-side researcher, an African American in the USA, who expressed, of course, one of his comments is, would his son get safely home, or might he get stopped and shot? Just really brought home, yeah, we've got some really big issues in the industry to tackle, but some enormous issues in society to tackle. And then I've mentioned before, but I'll highlight it again, the sheer quality and volume and passion that Rachel brought to the semiotics this in 2020 would be ones. Sue, anything particularly come to your mind?
I mean, again, there've been, like lots and lots of highlights, lots of great presenters. I mean, we've been lucky to have some extraordinary people presenting over the years. So in many ways, I'm reluctant to sort of shout out to anyone. But I mean, sort of if you do a montage, I can remember Shobha Prasad, who many of you will know, and she's now writing a cartoon for SMR's. I think it's on the SMR website. It may also be elsewhere, but really deep, thoughtful things. When it was called The Sounds of Silence, and it is on the recording, but it's not just a presentation that somebody put together in a couple of hours. It probably got years of thinking and behind it. And, you just sit back and you think, well, that's how to put together a conference presentation. Obviously it's been great to just see the sheer diversity of people. Sometimes we've actually even, had some really short ones where, people have, put their hand up to do, like 3-minute presentations, because, we've experimented with different, formats along the way. So there's a lot. I remember Bernie Malinoff from Canada did a nice one with John Poulston. It's called something like Sexy Questions, Dangerous Answers, but it was the sheer volume of sort of primary research that was in there, and they were exploring, some of the interactive formats in online survey tools and the implications for data, and, some solid work behind a good conference presentation. So there are a couple that come to mind, but certainly there are lots. And when you look back through the back catalogue sometimes, you think, oh my goodness, I've forgotten about that and that and that. And I think the other thing that's sort of in many ways surprising is how the length of time that these things remain relevant, because people sometimes think, oh, that was 2 years ago, or that was 4 years ago. I know I sometimes do. And when we went through the exercise last year of looking back, over the 10 years, a lot of the topics, still really, resonate today. So I think, don't think that people, in some ways things get out of date quite quickly, but in some ways, the classic building blocks of our industry don't change as quickly as you might think. And in some ways that's a good thing, because, it means we're standing on some solid ground.
Yes, very much so. And for the listeners who are not maybe familiar with some of those names, so some of the highlights there mentioned: John Kieran, who is of course from Brain Juicer, Shannon Danzy was mentioned there, Rachel Laws, Shobha Prasad. So do search for those names on the NewMR website and you'll see their presentations. I remember a fantastic presentation as well from Martina Albertova, I hope I'm pronouncing her surname correctly, who had a very deep presentation about meaning in promotion, in advertising, kind of everywhere around us. And I loved the way she was able to take inspiration from kind of anywhere she looked and kind of bring that back to insight, bring that back to market research. An absolutely fantastic presentation from her as well. And so on that note, what are the top things that make a good online only presentation in your view? And equally, what should people avoid?
Well, I think in many ways we've sort of touched on one of the key things is, and it's probably, well, definitely true for face-to-face as well. If people are passionate about a topic, that actually is the start of a really good presentation. Just, you know, if you're not passionate about it or interested in what you're talking about, the audience will know. And, you know, like there's no substitute for that. In actual fact, when I was looking at this question, I looked back because I actually did do a presentation at one point on what makes a good line presentation. And so I went back to play again to have a look. And in actual fact, back in June 2013, I thought we knew it all after 4 years. And again, it doesn't change. You know, when you're presenting online, some things are actually very similar to presenting face-to-face. Some things are a bit different. Some things, you know, are quite different. You know, you still need to plan, prepare, practice. You know, often presenters who appear to be very casual and off the cuff, you know, are some of the best prepared presenters that you will come across. I think don't, you know, ignore the basics. And in some ways it feels funny to be saying this, but, you know, make sure, you know, invest in a headset and a mic. You know, don't try and just rely on the inbuilt mic in your computer, although, you know, sometimes those things work well. Make sure you're in a quiet space, you know, have a good internet connection, you know, as far as you can. Practice both your content and the presentation and be familiar with the technology. When you're presenting, you really want to be in a position where you can focus on what you're saying. You don't need the extra stress of, oh, what button do I press, and things. And I mean, there are many tips and, you know, techniques you can use in that you can have somebody to help you, you know, if you're not as tech savvy as you'd like to be. You know, some other tips are, it can be very easy when you're just talking to yourself, you know, in a room, to sort of lose that energy that you get when you're live and getting feedback from the audience. But who says you have to sit in a room by yourself when you're, you know, presenting in a webinar? You know, have a colleague in there, or, you know, put a picture up on the wall, talk to the plant, talk to your cat, anything that gives you that engagement with the audience, because it really, you know, it can make such a difference. You know, there are lots of tips. You know, if you're a nervous speaker, you know, you can have a script written or bullet points, you know, that are stuck up on the wall. You can have post-it notes on the side of the screen. Now, once you start moving into those things, you need to be careful that people can't see you looking around like this. But if you practice with some of those tools, there's lots of other elements, you know, that you can bring into your presentation. So and things like that. I mean, I assume that most people are getting much more comfortable with, you know, cameras on and talking online after the year we've had. But certainly the first time you present to a webinar, it, you know, it feels like you're talking into a black hole, particularly in the early days when we, you know, tended not to turn cameras on. You know, you really do notice how much you miss that person, you know, sitting in the front row, you know, nodding as you talk, and you get a lot of comfort from that when you're presenting. So you have to sort of, you know, learn to, you know, present without those dynamics, or put some other mechanisms in place that help you. I know that, you know, in the early days, we used to sometimes, you know, have the webinars running on multiple screens, one where you were the presenter and one where you were logged in as an audience member, so you could keep an eye on things. So, I mean, get familiar with, you know, the technology, get comfortable, but, you know, do your homework and present on topics you're passionate about. And I think they're kind of the, you know, key ingredients. And, you know, avoid being somewhere noisy is probably the number one tip.
Thank you, Sue. Great tips there about the tech side of things and the importance of bringing energy and passion. And what about you, Ray? 1 or 2 quick tips on what makes a good online only presentation?
I would start by completely repeating what Sue said. Be interested in what you're presenting, be passionate. think about what the audience want to know. So one of the things that we often talk about is that a presentation should not be too salesy, whether it's face-to-face or online. That is not always true. If what you are talking about is super interesting, then actually people will want to listen to it. So when Zappy first came on the scene, people were quite delighted for them to come along and talk about their product. There's a new product from Blue Yonder called Click, which is a simple little button. You click it once, you click it twice. People are interested to hear that. When people first started talking about using methods of data capture and video and Living Lens and VoxPopMe and people like that, again, there was a real interest in hearing, how could I use that? What problem will it solve? What are the implications? What do I need to know to use it? So it is about thinking, what does the audience want to know, not just what do you want to tell them. And I think we can, it's an interesting balance to do within that. But that kind of probably links us on to some of the next topics. You want to be a bit shorter than the audience think it's going to take. But that's true of face-to-face as well as online.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, all good tips for face-to-face settings as well, which we'll hopefully get back to those some point soon in the future. So just a couple of questions left, wrapping up very shortly. So obviously we are in very strange times with coronavirus, where lots of events and workshops have had to go online. And that transition has understandably been challenging for many people, for SMR, for market research, so all these organisations where everything is now moving online. But in that sense, of course, NewMR were already online, you know, processes and software and things like that ironed out. But has COVID-19 affected NewMR in any way at all? And if it has or hasn't, what advice would you give other public speaking events who are now going online only for the foreseeable future?
I mean, there's probably many things we can touch on here. And I mean, compared to, say, back in 2010, one of the things that is really staggering now is just how many events are online. And I think probably the thing to keep in mind is that if you're running an online event or any event, you really need to have, you know, a purpose and create reasons for, you know, people to attend. You know, it's just so easy to, you know, put on an online event. And a bit you touched on before, Betty, you know, like podcasts come and go. And I think, you know, online events come and go. It's really about, you know, having a reason. Now, you know, is it a reason? Is it a unique selling proposition? But, you know, you probably shouldn't say, I'm going to run an online event in the same way you shouldn't say, I'm going to start a blog or I'm going to start a podcast. You should have, you know, your reason for wanting to do those. And, you know, if you get that right, some of the other things will follow.
Great, thank you. Ray, anything to add to that before we move on?
I think one of the biggest challenges for the traditional face-to-face organisers has been that they might have run a 2 or 3 day conference. They would start at 9 in the morning, they would finish at 5 in the afternoon, and the people would attend and would go into the room for most of the sessions. When you move that online, people simply can't give you that amount of time. So you can't take a 3 day conference and have a 3 day online conference. And we saw lots of organizations in 2020 try to do that, and everybody learned the same sort of thing. Indeed, it was quite hard for the chairs of sessions when we spoke to some of them afterwards to say, actually, I didn't visit any of the other sessions except mine, because by the time my session was an hour and a half, I had about 4 hours of preparation for it, and that was all I could devote to it this week. Whereas if I had traveled to Bangkok for the conference, it would have had 4 days of my time unbroken. So people have much less time to attend an online event than they used to have to attend an online event, and much less than face-to-face. So I think we are going to see quite a shift of emphasis, and we are planning for this and working with this, towards play again being the primary method that people engage with it, as opposed to be the alternative method of engaging with material.
And again, for anybody who's not familiar, the NewMR Play Again area is where that wonderful decade-rich archive of presentations is stored. And so, Ray, what you're saying there is it's actually all going to be about Play Again as opposed to listening live, which I don't think is a bad way to go either. Question from the audience here. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Betty, I'm just going to stay with that because I think there are some more thoughts around that, which is it's going to be about Play Again, but it still needs to be interactive. So I think we need to link it to discussions. So people who have watched this can now join a discussion that may run for a couple of months on this and develop additional ideas. So I think that would be a part. It's not just creating static Play Again references. I think people want to watch it and then have some ability to interact with it.
And yet that really reflects on the way we consume audio, mostly audio only media now. We'll listen to something on a lunch break, or listen to something in a coffee break, or out for a jog, but we might listen to that and think, oh, actually I've got something valuable I'd like to add to that, or I've got a question. So having a discussion component would be great as well, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. So question from the audience before we go on to our final question in the interview is from one of our attendees who's come to many conferences and presented as well at NewMR. And the question is, do you have a one that got away thought that you have come across in the last 10 years, something that you thought would have a much bigger impact on our industry that maybe hasn't yet?
Probably we've been singing the praise of John Kieran, so DigiVideos was one that I thought would be more successful than it was, and it kind of disappeared back in the brain juicer days. And the whole area of social media listening is much smaller now than it was 5 years ago. It has not delivered some of the things that we thought that it would deliver. It has, in fact, and it's delivered almost very few of the things that the proponents said it was going to deliver. There is great work out there. There is some really useful stuff, but I think it is much smaller than we'd anticipated. So I would highlight that as one of the ones that we thought would be bigger that isn't. And on the flip side of that, I would highlight blockchain, where we were almost the first people to say this will not be big in the near future. And it was nice to be proved right.
Yes, I remember that distinctively. And Ray, I think you were probably the first person I heard talking about blockchain. Actually, I read that you talked about blockchain because you did a series of LinkedIn posts about it. And I thought, nobody's talking about blockchain in market research. Why is Ray? So yes, it's nice when our predictions come to fruition, but equally when they don't as well. So our last question of the session, looking to the future now, which you've already touched on, Ray, so that's great. So you've obviously had 10 years of listening to presentations, delivering many yourselves, and that knowledge of patterns and trends in the market research industry is of course invaluable. But can you use that knowledge to perhaps say what trends and patterns you think will emerge throughout 2021 and perhaps in the next few years, and how that might affect NewMR as an organisation as well?
So I'll start, and then Sue, you might want to jump in with some thoughts. In fact, I've published a blog on this, and people can access that on the NewMR website. We are going to see more and more research conducted internally client side. Lots and lots of drivers for that. One of them, of course, is budget. The second is the fantastic growth in platforms. So there are more methods of being able to do it. Another is this trend towards agile and democratization in client-side organizations. Agile means you need to be interactive and really fast and hands-on, and the people who are working on projects need to be involved. That's where the democratizing comes into play. And that is really hard if what you do every time you need insight is you send a request off to an external agency who has none of the background, none of the integration. So we're seeing a lot of that. Now that's got some implications. It means that a larger and larger amount of the research that's conducted will be conducted by people whose main skill is not insights. It might be their fourth best, their fifth best. Right. They might not be even very good at it at all. So there is going to be a greater and greater need for safe research tools where it's harder to make a mistake and use them. So we talk about putting guardrails on that. And so that I see as being the bulk. And then I see a tremendous opportunity for all the problems that are too difficult to do that way. And that is when the discourse analysts, the narrative economists, the behavioral economists, the games experts, the ethnographers, the advanced analytics people all come into play. Everything that can't be done that way. So I think people really need to focus on, am I doing everyday solutions? Am I piling it high, selling it cheap? Or am I tackling the what I believe the young people call wicked problems, ones that you can't do yourself? You really do know that you to bring in resources.
Right. Well, I don't think I can class myself as a young person anymore, Ray, because when I was young, the word wicked was used to describe something really, really good.
Again.
That's wicked.
Yes.
And so what about you? Do you think that there are some trends and patterns that will emerge throughout 2021 and beyond in market research and insight that are perhaps different to some of Ray's predictions there?
I mean, I'm sure there almost certainly are. I mean, I think we're at a very interesting point in sort of, our lives, in the industry itself, because we've seen some things, speed up through last year. We've seen people become more comfortable, attending events online, having business meetings online, in the research industry, a lot of people have traditionally, like worked from home, freelancers, people who perhaps, lived away from, their main office. So I think this year, I think people will be sort of, looking around, reassessing, what changes work that, we might stick to, which bits will we, go back to, or will we be, pulling together bits? Some people who've enjoyed working from home, who haven't before, might say, oh, actually, I quite like working from home, but I don't want to work at home 5 days a week. So we might, see people mixing up, how they work and how they, conduct research. So I think we'll be in a fairly interesting space over the next 12 months. Hopefully, things will improve for everybody, in terms of the disruptions of the last 12 months. But I think we might see, some of them might be subtle changes, but I think we'll see people, pick the best bits out of their life, pre-2020 and, the best bits out of their life post-2020, and hopefully start to, montage that together. I think that will happen across, working lives, what events, should be face-to-face, what do people like, online. So I think we might see some sort of choose your own adventures happening in terms of how we work and live.
Thank you, Sue. And I've really enjoyed seeing more conversation around diversity and inclusion within the market research industry, as well as how we communicate with our participants. And of course, there is an organisation called Colour of Research, which started up not that long ago. And it's great to see that those conversations are happening and those organisations are coming through and championing a more inclusive industry. So now let's have a quick look at the future. Ray and Sue, what can we expect from NewMR? Now, we spoke about a focus on play again with some discussion. Is there anything else that we're going to see, new NewMR content?
I think we're going to see more learning related materials and more collaboration with other organizations. So Sue mentioned before that we don't want to repeat what other people do. If we can enable more of what they do, then that is great. both Sue and I are quite involved in training things, as indeed are you, Betty. And I think that there is going to be a real growth in 21, 22, 23 in the demand for more training, partly linked to what I was saying earlier, that more people who are inexperienced in research are being required to use research tools. So I think that we will see more of that. And new ways of breaking the materials up so it's easier for people to find solutions.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to seeing some of these collaborations happening. That sounds very exciting indeed. So before we wrap up, any final words from both of you about the celebration of NewMR 10-year anniversary? Or have I made you cringe enough by putting you in the limelight today?
I mean, NewMR, it actually really is something that isn't just Ray and I. There are so many people who have given up, like so much of their time. We've always been probably very particular about our production values. And although, it's not always perfect, we've always insisted that people, rehearse their presentation, get us their slides, early and things. And I mean, I would never underestimate, and anyone who's ever prepared a conference presentation, the sheer amount of hours and work that goes in. I mean, we've had, some extraordinarily busy people, who've had, big jobs, freely give up their time enthusiastically to, share experience, share knowledge. So it's very much, it's endured and survived because people, so freely, give up their time to, share knowledge, experience, war stories, so that's, it's not just us, it's everybody.
And so it's so like you to say something like that. Just take the pride off yourself and put it on somebody else. Ray, any final words about the NewMR 10-year anniversary from you?
I'm not big on looking backwards. So I am actually mostly thinking about what we're doing next and moving forward, trying to help people, trying to have fun, and maybe one day making some money along the way.
That's great.
But probably not.
Well, you both should be immensely proud of what NewMR has been able to achieve, what you both have been able to achieve through NewMR. And on the subject of diversity, which I touched on earlier, one of the things I've loved about NewMR over the years is that not only do we get the thought leaders presenting on NewMR that you'd see at the big conferences, but you'd also see people who've never spoken before. You'd see people of all different ages, somebody who's just got a bright idea and hasn't done anything with it yet, through to somebody who's been really working at something for 5 years or more and done the research and so on. And so NewMR has given, for me as an audience member, a diversity of speakers and content that I haven't been able to quite capture elsewhere. So thank you both for NewMR. And so over to Sue and Ray now for some closing remarks. But thank you both very much for your time today.
Thanks, Betty.
Thanks, Betty.